Hi everyone, welcome to what I hope to be the very first of many videos that I'm going to do about Python. The first thing I need to explain is a little bit about my setup here. I am currently using Ubuntu 16, which is a Linux distribution. Essentially, I'm not using Windows. I'm using a Linux distribution because as this is more in tune with the setup that I use on a daily basis. So this here is what's referred to as a terminal. Unlike a GUI interface of what we have here, we actually sometimes it's better to work in a character-driven interface. And generally in Linux you're going to be doing this not all of the time, but for installing software and doing some of the more hinky stuff with development, it will be better. So now I've explained that, the next bit is to explain what Python is. Python is what's referred to as a general purpose programming language. This essentially means is you can use it for a whole load of things. The kind of joke that I say is, if you want a thermonuclear device that's powered by a web app, Python is extensively the programming language that you'd go to. In some cases, although this is there is a certain amount of argument around that fact. So, if you're using Linux, you'll have the most basic Python installed on your system already. If you're on Mac, you need to go away and you need to go through a tutorial that'll teach you how to set up a Python environment on a Mac. This is because on Macs, Python is customized around the Mac, because Python is part of the core languages that are used in Mac. Windows will have no Python support on it whatsoever, so you will have to go away to the Python website and download it there. Now when you get that, what you'll get is an exe, and you download that and you run it on your computer, and it will give you an idle, which is a code editor and somewhere to run your code, so it's quite handy for development. You'd also need to go and look at how to add it to your system path so you can run Python files from the command line, like I'm going to be doing here. Just for the ease of everybody, I'm going to be using Python 3.6. It is a very recent development of Python at time of recording, and it's reasonably easy to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Python interpreter. Now to do this, all you have to do is type in Python 3.6 and hit enter. Now as you can see, I have installed Python 3.6. Now for Linux as it stands at the moment, and typically Ubuntu 16 as far as I'm aware, 3.6 is not installed, but you can get it through instructions that you get from the CPython website, so it's dead easy. You're going to see here that I've got Anaconda installed as well, but that's not really important because we're going to be focusing on CPython and CPython 3.6. Okay, let's get going then. So Python is a dynamically typed language. This means that you don't have to set up what your variable content is going to be, like you have to in other languages such as Java, C, and other languages like that. You have to tell the interpreter or the compiler of that language that what content is actually going to go in there, whether it's a string, an integer, a float, an array, a dictionary, something like that. So the only thing that you need to do really is to put in a variable name, so we'll call this one thing. My spelling's atrocious. And we're going to assign that a string of thing. I'm going to hit enter. So what we've done is we've told the interpreter to save something which of the name thing to be a string with the content of a string that has the characters that build up to thing. And we can do thing2 and save it as an integer, and we can build these things up. So far we've got a string and an integer. We can also have floats as well. And what I'm just creating here is what is referred to as a list in Python. Now, if you've worked with other programming languages, or you're learning computer science in schools or other places, you might refer to this as an array. It is an array. It is an array, very, very simply. So essentially what you can do with this is many of the things that you can do with an array. It is an array, it's just called differently in Python. The other thing that's also missing here is a dictionary, which vary dependent on who you're talking to of what they're called. So in JavaScript they're called objects. Sorry about that. Just give me 2 seconds. Right. There we go. So you've now got. So in JavaScript, a dictionary would be called an object. They're sometimes called 2D arrays. I've seen this in Python, in PHP, where they're called all 2D arrays because they have 2 dimensions rather than a list that has 1 dimension and it's just a list of values. These are very, very useful, and you're going to see this structure a lot in a lot of different languages. Just be careful when you're talking across languages, because you could be talking about a dictionary in Python and that might mean something in something different in, say, C. So that's something just to take care of. So one of the nice things about Python is that you have all these basic types. Now we can build on these types and we can build them into stuff that's going to be very powerful and intricate. So the only thing that's not currently here is an object. Now what an object is that it's a class. It's what we refer to as a class or a function, and something that's generally callable and will do something more advanced. But these, for the purposes of the first video, these are the simplest things that you're going to see in your Python code. So the next step, if I just hit return a couple of times, is how to call these. So because we're directly in the interpreter, if I type like a variable name, say thing, and hit return, it will instantly bring me that back. But when you're running files, you don't have this support. It will just run the complete file and do any instruction as you've put it down. So the interpreter will provide this output, but you won't see this output because you haven't told the interpreter to output it in a certain way. Now the way that you do this in Python is through the print function. And as you can see, it's printed out. Two things to notice. The first is that print is a function, and I'll get onto that out of why that's important in a second. The other thing is that when you're printing it, it doesn't have the speech marks. This is because you're printing the contents of the value and not the value in the interpreter. So essentially what you're doing is you're specifically telling the Python interpreter to go, hey, print this on the screen here. Now the other thing is that in earlier versions of Python, 2.7 and before, print was a keyword, not a function. And what essentially that meant is that essentially your syntax would look something like this. And then that would print the value of thing. I personally prefer it as a function because it is a function and it is something that it's going to do. But it's a nice thing. So in later videos I'm going to go over these basic values and go over them with more detail. But for this video I think I'm just going to go over the basic structure. So having an interpreter like this is useful because essentially what you can do is you can just pop in Python code and check that bits and pieces work. But this isn't the most powerful thing. What I've just done is I've just pressed Control D, and that will take me out of the Python interpreter and return me to the terminal. Now this terminal is Bash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Atom to the current location. I'm going to enter my password, which you're not going to be able to see, and I'm not going to tell you what my password is. So Atom is currently opening up. If you're not aware of what Atom is a code editor, a very, very simple, lightweight code editor. And you can see that it's open to the directory video stuff, which is really useful. So what essentially I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it Python basic.py, and what this will do is it will create a file called pythonbasic.py. Now .py is quite important because that's your file extension. In Windows, Mac and maybe Linux not so much, the file extension will tell the operating system, hey, this is a Python file, you need to run this using the Python interpreter. And very, very simply, Windows will do it once you've set it as on Windows. Linux, you have to tell it which Python interpreter you want to use very often, unless you're happy with it running in Python in your default Python settings, but it may not work in some cases. And Mac, I'm not really sure with Mac because I've never used Python on a Mac, but I've never had any complaints from anybody who uses my software on a Mac. So what we have open is our Python basic.file, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to check this side that it exists. Okay, so we're perfectly happy that it exists both sides. Now you don't have to check always in your terminal that it exists in your code editor. I'm just proving that you can do certain things. So what we're going to do here is we are going to do kind of the same thing that we've got here, but we're going to be using the values that we've defined here, but we're going to need to redefine them because we're in a new context. When you define something in the interpreter, when you close down that interpreter, it's lost. But if you save it in a file, it will when you run that file into the interpreter, it will read all of that information back in all on its own as it goes through the instructions. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to write a function. Now in Python, the keyword for creating a function is def. So define. So essentially what you're doing is you're defining a new function, and we're going to call this function add, and then we're going to add our parentheses, and these are just basic brackets that you would use, and we are going to add the function arguments a and b. And now we're going to put in a colon. What a colon basically means is it tells the interpreter, okay, this code block belongs to this function name. So we're going to hit return, and now what the code editor is doing is it's going, okay, this person has created a code block and he's now hit return, and I'm going to automatically indent that. Now, the Python community say that this is 4 spaces. The Python interpreter doesn't mind so much this, as long as you're consistent. So as long as you're happy to be consistent, the Python interpreter doesn't mind. It doesn't mind about tabs and spaces. Developers mind about tabs and spaces, and my thing is 4 spaces, and I know a lot, and I know another Python developer who is passionate about his 4 spaces as well. So essentially what we're going to do is we're now just going to return the result of the function of a plus b. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to print the result of add of 2 plus 2. So when we run this through our Python interpreter, and please notice that I'm using the 3.6 interpreter if you're following along, it will print out the number 4 because we're adding 2 plus 2 together. This is handy because this clears out the repetitive tasks. It's going to make your code a little bit drier. It's going to make your code a little bit cleaner. It's going to make sure that you're not repeating yourself constantly. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at another object very quickly, and we're going to look at classes. So we're going to define our class, okay, so we've defined a class called tree. Now the biggest thing that you're going to notice is I haven't used what's referred to as parentheses when I create a class. This is because I'm creating an object. Now, the life cycle of a class is that you define a class, you initialize a class, and then you call the methods and the properties of that class. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define something that the class is going to do, which is referred to as a method. And always when you instantiate a class, well, not always, but it's commonly agreed that the first function, the first class method that is called when you instantiate a class is the init function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly define this and go pass. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to notice a couple of things of what I've done. So init is a class method that exists. and it's very often that it will exist, and it will most often exist in most classes and can be redefined. So essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, when you instantiate this, look at these things first of all. I've passed it an argument of self. Now this is something that's quite important to classes, as I will explain in a later video. So stay tuned for that video. So essentially everything after this you will have as normal arguments. So let's say we want to know the type. Let's say we want to know the type of the tree. Yeah, let's just leave it at the type of tree because that would define everything else. And then what you can do is you can define different methods as you would normally. And something that you have to do when you're working with classes is that you have to always pass it what I call the self object. And that's really it and everything that I have to tell you in this video. So just to recap, we've gone over what Python is. I've shown you some stuff in the Python interpreter, and I've shown you some stuff in the code editor and the more advanced stuff. So in the next video I'm going to be going through strings, and that's a whole video to itself. And I'm going to be showing you some really nifty things. But one of the important things that I want you to remember is that this is a learning process. Don't get disheartened. Keep going. Keep enjoying. And if you don't enjoy Python, go and look at other programming languages. Go and look at PHP. Go and look at Ruby. Go and look at JavaScript, because they're all great languages that do things slightly differently. I'm just going to say bye-bye, and I hope to see you all at my next video. Bye!